Welcome to the Bitcoin Beat with Shaun and Jeff. I'm Shaun, and this is my co-host Jeff. And today we're going to chat about something pretty interesting that's been hitting the social media airwaves. Is quantum going to destroy Bitcoin? Well, we'll dig into that a little bit on some news that has come out recently. But first, I have a favor to ask of you. If you haven't seen it yet, last week Jeff and I did an interview with Dennis Porter, the CEO of Satoshi Action Fund. We sat down and chatted with him for almost an hour talking about a bill that's been presented in the United States Senate regarding Mind in America, an energy infrastructure type bill. We spent a lot of time and effort into that episode. Check it out for us. Give a comment, let us know what you think about it, and definitely like that. But this week, we're going to talk about some more recent news. Jeff, are you ready to dig into some of this week?
Yeah, let's unpack it.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get this show kicked off here. I wanted to start with your update regarding the gold to Bitcoin ratio and what's changed recently with that.
Yeah, we've been tracking this together, Shaun, since, what was it? Late March. It's been about 45 days now. And every week we're looking at this because we view Bitcoin as actually a lot less risky than most people do. So in comparison with gold, and gold has traditionally been a store of value when risk goes up, Bitcoin has been outperforming gold, and by a good margin. It's now up 20% in favor of Bitcoin. So we have Bitcoin up about 9% and gold down about 11% since the war in Iran began. And we're measuring this when actual missiles and bombs started going off. So, there was some lead up until that point. But then at that point, we said, all right, let's look at this snapshot in time and check out the gold to Bitcoin ratio. And so far, Bitcoin has been outperforming. And I think that just goes to the superior properties that Bitcoin has.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. It seems like every week we talk about this, it keeps moving in that same direction. And it's only going to get wider, yeah.
Yeah, and the superiority of Bitcoin too is lost on a lot of folks because they don't understand the digital asset properties that Bitcoin has, which is one of the reasons why we have this podcast to start educating people about these things. And one of those is that Bitcoin is just a neutral reserve currency. It's hard to centralize, unlike gold. It's very easy to divide. It's hard to confiscate. It's easy to secure. You can transfer it and within 10 minutes have it instantly settled. So there's a reason why I think nation states, companies, and even individuals are waking up to Bitcoin because of the superior properties that it has as a neutral currency.
Yeah, I agree with all that. I'm kind of interested to see how this continues moving forward as the conflict's still going on. One other thing that I want to point out, I think Michael Saylor agrees with you that this is the best asset to own. In fact, his company has just announced another purchase this week. So over the last week, they've bought in 13,927 Bitcoin for about, in US dollar terms, about $1 billion worth again. And so they're just stacking an insane amount of Bitcoin, more than's being mined. In fact, I think this week's purchase is slightly more than the amount that would be mined in an entire month. And they're just gobbling it up week after week. One of the stats I like to track is kind of fun, is guessing when they're going to hit 1 million Bitcoin. So right now with this last purchase that they announced, they're at over 780,000 Bitcoin. If you take just 2026 purchases alone, they're averaging 7,743 Bitcoin a week. And if you extrapolate that out, if they keep on that pace, the same pace, not more, not less, they're going to hit 1 million Bitcoin on their balance sheet by October 28th, which would be an October, we'll call it a Halloween surprise. So that could be a pretty big mark if by the end of the year they have 1 million. And right now they're on pace to beat that with some time left on the clock.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to see MicroStrategy accumulating so much Bitcoin, and also like where they are in regard to their market cap compared to other publicly traded companies in the S&P 500 and in the NASDAQ. I'd be interested to get your take on when they are going to start getting up there into the top, 50, top 25, top 10 publicly traded companies based on market cap. Obviously, that has a lot to do with not only their accumulation, but the underlying dollar denominated price of Bitcoin. But what do you think? Are they going to be up there with, the Microsofts and the Amazons and the Nvidias?
I think
Or
that's
do they
very
still have a ways to go?
I think it's very possible. As far as timing, you're right. I mean, it's going to be correlated to the fiat, the dollar term of Bitcoin, because they're a software company that makes a little bit of cash flow generation from their software product, but in comparison to their holdings when it comes to their digital treasury, their assets, which is Bitcoin, it's just insignificant. It really is not a software company anymore when you look at the financials. So I would think that they have a very high likelihood of cracking the top list, including, I'd have to run some numbers, but I mean, realistically, with Bitcoin being as high as it is as an asset by itself, and then being a leveraged Bitcoin play, now they're also into fixed money markets. They're basically taking market share from bonds and other old financial instruments in the legacy system. I mean, realistically, top 50 seems like almost like a guarantee, and we should be talking about, is it going to be like a top 10 type security or asset in the future? I don't know. It's definitely possible. I'm interested in watching this every single week to see what changes, especially when the price goes up. Let's say the price doubles and we're close to all-time highs, or we hit new all-time highs and we're at 150,000 per Bitcoin. Are they still going to be able to be buying 12, 13,000 Bitcoin a week? And I think the math works out to yes, because the interest will only get higher for the underlying asset.
Yeah, that's a good point, though. As the asset goes up in dollar denominated terms, it could potentially become a little more difficult for them to acquire so much. But I don't know. I don't discount that, because they do have their preferred shares now that they're offering for depending on which one you get, could be 10 to 11% yield. Those will become attractive to investors who are looking to reallocate into this space and want more of a fixed income aligned strategy with Bitcoin. But I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I also know that there are things that can happen quickly that maybe people aren't really positioned for. So if you look at the total addressable market, say, for example, real estate, we estimate that it's over 300 trillion, probably between 300 trillion and 350 trillion. So let's just take the low number, 300 trillion. If 1% of that 300 trillion goes into Bitcoin, Bitcoin being a $1.5 trillion asset right now, that's not a 1x on Bitcoin, that's a 2x on Bitcoin. And so, we're looking at like a $250,000 price point just to see a little movement from real estate. And that's only one asset within the broad spectrum of the total addressable market, which includes, another 300 plus trillion of bonds, treasury bonds, corporate bonds. That also includes other things like the S&P 500. That includes collectibles, art, rare things, includes gold. So the Bitcoin is such a tiny portion of the total addressable market that if even a small amount of people wake up to realize the importance of this asset and they make a small adjustment in their portfolio, it could do dramatic things for the price of Bitcoin in a short period of time.
Yeah, it could be a pretty violent move. You're right. And I mean, that's something that talking about those risks too, I kind of wonder what some of the big holders' takes are on our main subject for today, and that's this quantum threat that everybody's been talking about the last few weeks. It really indeed is kind of ended up being like the major FUD for this particular year. Everybody's worried about quantum. You had shared this post I have up here from Marty Ben's page. What was, explain that to me. What was going on with this?
Yeah. So as someone who's in this space and helping people strategically allocate to Bitcoin, this comes up because people it's almost like their psychology needs an excuse to not invest in Bitcoin. And so what's the next FUD around the corner that can justify them from getting into the asset class? Well, It seems like the most recent one is quantum threats. So I'm no expert in this space at all. Like, I'm not a quantum theorist or physicist or scientist or anything like that. I'm just a regular dude that likes to do a lot of analysis and research, especially as it pertains to what I invest in. And so, this caught my attention because it came from an account that I trust in the space. This is TFTC. This is Marty Bent's account. And they shared this posting from a research paper that just came out from a guy who works at Starkware. And what they're doing is they're announcing a proposal to make Bitcoin transactions quantum safe. And here's the kicker: it doesn't require any changes to the code base. It doesn't require a soft fork. So that's the news. That's the high level article headline that captured my attention. It kind of led me down this rabbit trail a little bit.
Yeah, one of the things I found interesting, the first thing I saw when you sent this to me was, it's something that is theoretical, but it's something that can be done right now. It doesn't need a change. It doesn't need consensus. It doesn't need people to agree that we need to move in this direction. And I found that kind of interesting. And like you, I mean, I'm interested in this because this is something that's important to me. I invest in Bitcoin heavily, and I'm not technically up to speed on all the inner workings of how this works, but I've spent a lot of the weekend digging into it, and I find it fascinating and pretty interesting. One thing that I always kind of note whenever I have this kind of discussion in person with other Bitcoiners, like at a local Bitcoin meetup or other places, there's two different types of like attack vectors on Bitcoin when you're talking about quantum. And it's easy to kind of just use quantum as this big scary cloud to kind of encompass all risk, but there's a risk on cracking your code, your password, your seed phrase, your 12-word, 24-word seed phrase. And that's not what a lot of people are talking about. That, even in theory, is near impossible, even with quantum computers. What has been going around in the Bitcoin circles, especially all over X and social media, is this attack on the actual transactions. So like the addresses. And what this is talking about is in regards to when you send a transaction, you have to broadcast your public key, and it's going to match it up with a private key. But that transaction broadcasting your public key is something that's changed over the years through either soft forks or other consensus changes on Bitcoin. And this particular process changes the way that you use your public key. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, or if you have any other different understanding than this, but when we talk about the addresses, there's even kind of two attack vectors with addresses. One is you have the coins that were transmitted, let's say early on, 2009 to 2012, the old Satoshi era coins, and those broadcasted publicly the public key, and those are still visible right now to this day until there was a change in the way that the keys were published. So those are always the low-hanging fruit, because you can find wallets that haven't moved Bitcoin but have broadcasted your public key, and those are something that's at risk. One of the biggest concerns, which is kind of more of the mathematical academic type mindset, the ones that really get into the weeds talk about, is when they can do that very quickly and crack the public key in less than 10 minutes. Because when you send a transaction, on average, every block confirms in about 10 minutes on average over time. So theoretically, if it could get fast enough and it could break that code, that technology, in 10 minutes or less, the risk is you could send your Bitcoin and they could actually basically reroute it, have a fake transaction, and take that money. Now, those are gulfs apart from being able to happen, but they're both underneath the same attack vector. Is that kind of your understanding when we talk about the way the signatures work and the public keys?
Yeah, and to get into the weeds a little bit, the way that standard transactions work today is they rely on ECDSA signatures, which are theoretically vulnerable to Shor's algorithm on a sufficiently powerful quantum computer. So again, we're talking about a theoretical possibility. It hasn't happened. By my estimation, it's probably over a decade away. But it's good that these researchers are focusing on a potential solution here. And what the solution is in this case, and by the way, this is one of 3 potential solutions. There are some other ways of being quantum resistant in Bitcoin, but today specifically, we're talking about QSB, Quantum Safe Bitcoin. And this proposal, which was published on April 9th, again by Starkware, allows you to basically create a super secure transaction, kind of like a fingerprint. And so instead of relying on the elliptic curve math for security, it uses a hash to signature puzzle where the script hashes a transaction bound public key. Now, I know that's a lot of big fancy words, and it's like, what the heck is this guy talking about? But remember, it's like a fingerprint. Okay, so what you're doing with this transaction is you're actually beefing it up. So this transaction will potentially cost a little bit more and take a little bit longer. Those are 2 of the downsides about this solution. However, it's nice to have something like this in case the quantum threat becomes a reality. The other thing this solution doesn't really address are people who procrastinate. So in order for this solution to actually be a viable option during a real threat, you have to have already made these transactions, right? And they're a little bit longer. They take a little bit longer. They can be a little bit more expensive. And, you got to get ahead of the curve on this. No pun intended. But that's my basic understanding of how this works.
Those are a lot of the similar points that I kind of came out with after digging into this a little bit after you sent it to me. And I had had a post up here that I kind of went through what I thought some of the biggest downsides were. And you had mentioned one of the big ones that I noticed. Each transaction would cost more. I think it's estimated at $75 to $125 right now, compute, to be able to do that, which then really means, like, in an emergency situation, like you said, this doesn't fix everything, and it's something that you got to start looking forward and think ahead to. It doesn't make the end all fix everything, because if somebody's buying a $5 coffee in Nicaragua, they're not going to want to spend $130 for that coffee. So it's really for big transactions. So say you're moving large sums of money and you need to protect that. That in a pinch or in an emergency situation where quantum's a real threat and it's actually an issue, it's not theoretical like it is right now, that could be something temporarily, hopefully to buy enough time to get consensus around an actual either soft fork, hard fork, some kind of code change if we haven't already gotten there. One of the other things I noted is it doesn't work on the current default transaction filters. So you have to actually bypass the default filters and go straight to the miner, which is kind of touching on another issue in the space that we're not going to get into in this episode, but discussing non-monetary transactions. But this would be something like Marathon Digital, their mining company. They have a slipstream service that would be able to do it, and that's really how that cost ends up going up, because they would actually have to do a lot of extra compute on that signature because they hash the signature and they got to basically confirm it's you. And it's something like, if I remember the number right, was it 7 trillion, on average 7 trillion actions that try to resolve that hash to resolve it to the signature. It's something that's just wild to think about. But it's interesting that the key thing from this is, like you said, this is all in theory of a risk. It's not something that's happening right now. It's something that's off in the future. We don't know how long though, so it's preparing for that possibility. And this is one option to try to help secure some of those transactions. I think that's kind of the main upside. If for some reason we are unprepared and this happens sooner than we think, this would be a short-term temporary fix that could immediately work. And that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, exactly. And the chance of like what this new solution does is it creates, like, this is something that I grokked right before the show, but it creates a 1 in 70 trillion chance that you're able to match the hash, right? The hash to signature puzzle, which is why it will cost more for the transaction, because you're using more GPUs to do that. But again, It's a solution. It's a potential solution. It's one of 3 different solutions. And I think in subsequent episodes coming up, we can perhaps touch on the other 2 solutions. One of the other things that I do want to be kind of conscientious of is that my preference is that we go and evaluate these solutions in a very slow and methodical way, right? We're not just creating a solution to fix a problem that doesn't exist, right? We don't want to introduce, there's always second order consequences to actions. And one of the second order consequences to doing this too fast and creating some quantum resistant solution too quickly would be that we introduce some sort of exploit or a vulnerability that wasn't there before. So I'm a big advocate of these researchers, but I'm also a big advocate that, we go about this in a slow, methodical way. And as Bitcoin has proven time over time again, the consensus mechanism is designed to have checks and balances so that changes can't be made fast. And I think that's one of the most powerful things about Bitcoin, but it could be a potential risk if we just ignore this issue.
Yeah, I 100% echo those comments. The speed to change things for a perceived threat, rushing to change code could present more difficulties down the road. In fact, that kind of ties into this issue. When I'd mentioned how old addresses back in the Satoshi era would be vulnerable to this because they've broadcasted their signature not hashed, but in the open. When Taproot in 2021 was implemented, that put any of the Taproot transactions since then at risk as well, just like the old Satoshi era wallets. Now, again, this is just one, we're not to give any kind of fear to people because this is not something that's in the wild yet, but it just puts them in the same bucket as the old Satoshi era coins. And one estimate that I found is that back in 2025, so taking all of last year, over 21% of all transactions on Bitcoin were the Taproot protocol signature version. And so it's more than just the estimated 4 to 5 million Bitcoin back in the Satoshi era wallets that are at risk, ones that have transmitted some Bitcoin or have parked their Bitcoin, not submitted it. It includes newer Taproot transactions that have at least spent Bitcoin, because once it's spent, then that signature's out in the open to try to be attacked. Now, it's not easy, obviously. We're talking about all these theories and high compute and technology that's not here yet, but Taproot and SegWit are 2 different updates that helped a lot of things on Bitcoin, but it creates another vulnerability here. But we risk things moving fast, and you're 100% spot on there. So that's why I like covering this, and I agree with you. I think this is interesting enough that this will probably be a conversation we'll follow up on future podcasts, so we can dig into a little bit more without getting too technical. And the key takeaway, it sounds repetitive, but it's worth saying because people are fearful of this. This isn't happening now. We're planning for the future for a theoretical risk that may be years away, could be decades away. But it's important to talk about it now so we're not caught off guard when it becomes real.
100%. And also the conclusion, at least for me, is when do you want to buy Bitcoin? You want to buy it when it's low, right? And we are significantly off our all-time highs. And it doesn't seem to me that it's a coincidence this quantum threat is now becoming a hot topic. And you got to ask yourself, is this designed to keep people out of Bitcoin? Is this designed to allow, the institutions or whoever else, Michael Saylor, for example, an opportunity to collect and accumulate and stack sats at a low fiat denominated dollar price? And, I think if you're ignoring Bitcoin right now because of a potential quantum threat, you're looking at this the wrong way, and you really should reconsider.
Yeah, that's a rabbit hole that I could spend hours digging on, because you're right, that kind of manipulation could be real, and it's definitely something that people should not be fearful of. And we're all talking about this as a risk in theory. Well, I want to kind of jump into what's actually happening right now with Bitcoin. And you had noted this this post regarding some of the things that Bitcoin Magazine had just posted. I have their post pulled up. Tell our viewers what you saw in this.
Okay, so this Yeah, this was interesting. These tweets I started to notice last week, basically saying that Iran was opening the Strait of Hormuz for payment in Bitcoin. So anybody who wanted to go through the strait needed to pay in Bitcoin. This was apparently verified by the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and some other, I'll call them semi-reputable news sources. I mean, we all know how the mainstream news media works these days, but I'll leave it there. Uh, I believe this is probably true. I believe that there's a higher chance that this is true than not true. Why wouldn't you accept Bitcoin? It's a neutral reserve asset, like we discussed earlier. It's permissionless. It doesn't require a bank. There's no third party settling it for you. It's synonymous. So there's an element of privacy to it. I could totally understand why nation states would want to accept Bitcoin rather than some other fiat currency that can be weaponized against a sovereign nation. So this to me, I mean, this is history in the making, folks. Like us Bitcoiners have been expecting this for some time. And I was kind of surprised at how fast things have, happened over the last 18 months in terms of other things like the strategic Bitcoin reserve, but it's happening quick and in real time. And now a sovereign nation wants to use this to allow people to pass through the strait. Since that time, of course, the U.S. has decided to block the strait. They wanted it open, but now they want it blocked. So I don't know. Things are changing quick, folks. I don't know if Iran is really still able to accept Bitcoin for passage. But the fact that this was announced says enough, right? Yeah. It's our game theory proving out in real time.
And to your point, like why would they want to take fiat when it can be controlled and seized and paused and frozen? Terrence had this post up here that kind of talks that I enjoy his tone on a lot of his social media posts. He's like, they took Bitcoin. What? They're not taking XRP. Like, sorry, XRP army, but I thought that was supposed to be faster than the banks. They're not taking Solana. It's supposed to be faster than Visa. What about the programmability of smart contracts and Ethereum? They're not asking for Ethereum. They're not asking for a stable coin, which is just digital fiat. Like all these other hype narratives of side chains or other chains trying to do things quote unquote better than Bitcoin. Bitcoin is still king. It's the one that can't be controlled. It's the one that they can transact with freely. And it's interesting to see this in real time happen and not just in theory. You're right. It's pretty, as awful as the whole situation is and what's going on physically, seeing that this is playing out when we're talking about Bitcoin being for everybody, including our enemies, it's just proving that out in real time.
Yeah. And it just goes to the immutable power of the Bitcoin ledger, right? Bitcoin is a time chain. It doesn't stop. It's 24/7, and it doesn't require any middleman to approve a transaction. So after that settles, no one can go back and say, oh, never mind, let's erase that from the ledger like it didn't happen.
I agree with you, man. It's interesting. I'm going to continue following that, as I'm sure everybody else is, and we'll see more adoption come as we go on. I think that's probably a good spot to wrap up today's episode. Want to remind our viewers, we got one more episode coming up before the Bitcoin conference, and we got a lot of good content planned for you. So definitely tune in, subscribe to the channels. We'll have links to both my channel and Jeff, so you can follow whenever we drop an episode. And then we're also obviously super excited about the conference coming up. If you're coming to the conference, shoot us a message, comment on our YouTube, DM us on X, or tag us on there. We'd love to be able to meet any viewers on there. Any final words to wrap up today's episode, Jeff?
I would just say, as a takeaway from this episode, all bets are off, and risk is mispriced everywhere, meaning traditional allocators think Bitcoin is extremely risky, but traditional assets are not. We kind of flip that, and we think that Bitcoin is extremely undervalued, and it's going to continue to outperform all other assets over time. So if you haven't got a seat at the table yet, reach out to Shaun or I. We'd love to help walk you through getting set up in the right way. That's what we're here for.
I agree. Thanks. And I'll wrap it up by reminding everybody, if you don't have any Bitcoin, get off of zero. But if you do have some, keep stacking sats. We'll see you guys next week.